There's plenty to unpack regarding the Buffalo Bills defensive line dynamics entering 2024. So we're going to break them all down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, folks, welcome in. Very excited to talk Buffalo Bills defensive line entering 2024. There is so much to unpack here. And I think the performance of this defensive line is absolutely critical for not only the regular season success of the Buffalo Bills, but how far they go in the playoffs. I think that this defensive line has failed the Bills in the playoffs, to be quite honest with you. And so I want to talk about all of it today. I want to talk about why I'm excited. I want to talk about Gregory Rousseau, the defensive tackle depth, the new draft picks that were added to this mix, Von Miller, some of the competitions, and then, of course, that big question that I have about what this team or what this team's defensive line has and has not done in the playoffs. So let's get into it. I want to start with some metrics, though. Yesterday I talked offensive line dynamics. Today is defensive line dynamics, and I want to bring up some of the same metrics, but from the defensive line side of things. So last season, the Bills' defensive line enjoyed a pressure rate of 24.4%. Very good, sixth best in the NFL. And the Fantasy Points data suite has a metric that I really like. It's pressure rate over expectation. And what they factor in here is quarterback time to throw. You hear me talk all the time in the quarterback previews for the upcoming Bills game, where I talk about average time to throw, and some of these guys get the ball out so quick that you really can't. It's just like mathematically not possible to be able to get there. So this metric that Fantasy Points uses factors in historical time to throw. It factors in down and distance and gives you a true reflection of pressure rate. And the Bills, even with that, still rank sixth. They had 54 sacks. That's the fourth most in the NFL last year. And it's not just a volume stat. On an efficiency perspective, it's very good as well. 8.9% of dropbacks against the Bills last season were sacks. That's third best in the league. And then there's the yards before contact. So 1.44 adjusted yards before contact per rushing attempt. It's actually middle of the pack, 14th. You'd like to see that actually be a little bit better. So some very good metrics when it comes to the pass rush, and some average metrics when it comes to run defense. But there's a lot to build off of, and there's some improvements to some parts of this defensive line that gets me excited. But as I really get into what makes me excited, it's about three guys from 2023 that are back and are coming off what I would label as the best season of their career. And of course, that conversation starts with Ed Oliver. We know it. Ed Oliver had a huge breakout season last year. And Brandon Beane rolled the dice, extended him before the season, and he's looking like a genius for that. Coming in at what? Was it $17 million a season? These defensive tackles now are getting 25, tons of money. Look at what Christian Wilkins got and what Derek Brown got. That was a heck of a move by Brandon Beane. And Ed Oliver goes out and has 9.5 sacks. After having 14.5 combined in his first 4 seasons, had 9.5, had a career high 14 tackles for loss. His previous career high was 10. Career high 16 quarterback hits. Career high 65 total pressures. The previous high there was 40, and he's entering his age 26 season. Ed Oliver is where you start this conversation if you want to get excited about this Bills defensive line. It's what he did and the trajectory here. And with Ed Oliver, top 10 pick, expectations were always high. Of course, there was a time when Ed Oliver was at Houston where people thought this could be the number 1 pick in the draft. The Bills get him, was it pick 8 or 9, something like that? And so the expectations were always so high, but there was probably some unfair expectations, just being mindful of, hey, this guy played nose tackle in an odd front defense at Houston, and he's transitioning to a new position and a new style of defense. While he's got a lot of athleticism and traits that get you excited, defensive tackles are a little bit slow developing at times, and that was the case with Ed Oliver. But if the norm is what he showcased last year, then the Bills have one heck of a 3 technique on their hands. So Ed Oliver coming off of his best season. A.J. Epenesa also coming off of his best season. In fact, he's coming off back-to-back 6.5 sack seasons, and he's doing that with very, modest amount of opportunity. In 2023, only 221 pass rush snaps. In 2022, only 245 pass rush snaps. And he's got 6.5 sacks in both seasons. I mean, high-volume pass rushers in the league get 500 or so pass rush snaps. I mean, Epenesa is getting like half of that. And I think this season he'll certainly be well over 300, maybe 350 pass rush snaps. Hopefully he can maintain what he's done in a smaller sample size over a bigger opportunity. But what gets lost in the conversation about A.J. Epenesa is how good he was before the rib injury. This guy was unbelievable. In 13 games before the rib injury, which happened against Kansas City after what he had the interception, huge big play in that game, the win against Kansas City during the regular season. In those 13 games, 6.5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 10 quarterback hits, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and 6 batted passes. I want to call your attention to the 6 batted passes because that tied for the league lead with TJ Watt and Khalil Mack among edge rushers when it comes to batting passes at the line of scrimmage. 6. Keeping in mind that A.J. Epenesa did that in 221 pass rushing snaps. Both TJ Watt and Khalil Mack, who tied him, had over 520 pass rush snaps. More than double. Comfortably more than double. But A.J. Epenesa tied them up when it comes to batted passes. Then he comes back after missing some time with a rib injury, 4 games post-rib injury, and he's really quiet. 2 tackles for loss, 1 quarterback hit, and a pass breakup. That's it. Pro Football Focus uses a metric called pass rush productivity. Weeks 1 through 13, his pass rush productivity score was a 9.6, 10th in the NFL. 10th in the NFL among edge rushers that had at least 100 pass rush snaps. Then weeks 14 through the divisional round, that 9.6 went to a 4.3, and he was 94th in the NFL among pass rushers. The dude was on an absolute tear, and then he got derailed due to the rib injury. The Bills bring him back. They sign him to a 2-year extension, and the opportunity for him is once again big. If he can play like he did for those first 13 games for the entire season, the Bills got themselves an impact player on their hands. Now, it's got to happen, but what he's done over the last 2 years has been really strong. And now there's no Leonard Floyd, right? I mean, there's plenty of snaps to be had here on this defensive end rotation, and you got to feel like A.J. Epenesa is going to eat up a lot of them. The last guy that I want to mention in terms of coming off of the best season of their career, it's Daquan Jones. And I know that it was a small sample size, right? Like pre-injury Daquan Jones. That guy was unreal. Let me give you some numbers on him. So in those first 4 games, he got injured in week 5 against Jacksonville. Those first 4 games, Daquan Jones had 15 pressures in 78 pass rush snaps, which that's an unbelievable rate. He comfortably, and I mean comfortably, led all interior defensive linemen in pass rush productivity over the first 4 weeks of the season. He also had 7 run stuffs in 31 run defense snaps. And a run stuff is when you stop the ball carrier with still more than like 70% of the line to gain Like they're good, impactful tackles. Then he gets injured in week 5, returns in week 17. Not quite what we saw earlier in the season, but all things considered, coming back from a pec injury and not really playing in any games, he was pretty good down those last 4 games, 2 playoff games, last 2 regular season games. But if those guys are healthy and can build on what they did last year, that is going to be monumental. As will Greg Rousseau's development, as will what Von Miller looks like. We'll get into those dynamics here on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with me. Folks, I can't wait for the NFL season. I'm sure that's the case for you as well, and you probably want to get to some of these games. Well, if you do, you got to download the Game Time app. Game Time is the fast and easy way to purchase tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. The app is awesome. It's easy to navigate. They give you last-minute tickets. They give you flash deals. They give you a seat view, a picture, so you know exactly what to expect when you get to the venue. But my favorite part is the all-in pricing. You know exactly what you're going to pay at the beginning of the transaction, at the end of the transaction. No surprise processing fees coming your way. So check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's talk Greg Rousseau. This is a big year for Greg Rousseau. Bills' first-round pick out of Miami. Only played like 1 or 2 seasons, like a season and a half ever at defensive end. He was like a safety and wide receiver in high school. Converts to defensive line at Miami. Has a pretty big season. Gets drafted in the first round by the Bills. There's some rawness there, but you can tell he's got size and power and length and heavy hands, and very quickly became a top-tier run defender. And the pass rush has been good. It just hasn't been great. And so that's what I'm excited to kind of figure out this year. He had 8 sacks in his second season. You felt like he was well on his way. And then you even felt that way going in, the early season 2023. His first 4 games, Greg Rousseau was unbelievable. First 4 games, 3 sacks, 2 pass breakups, a forced fumble, 4 tackles for loss. His pass rush productivity was a 9.2, which was 13th in the NFL among edge rushers with at least 75 pass rush snaps through the first 4 games of 2023. Then he broke a bone in his foot, missed the Jacksonville game, and then just tried to play through it the rest of the year. And he wasn't quite the same dynamic player that we saw in 2022 in the first 4 games of 2023. That pass rush productivity that was 13th fell to 28th over his last 14 games of the season, including the playoffs. He's only 24 years old. There's obviously a lot riding on this season for contract extension purposes. You can make a case that, Brandon Beane could consider giving him the Ed Oliver early extension and enjoying a bargain deal. Greg Rousseau might say, no, I want to play this year. I want to produce, and I want that number to go up. I'm not signing no contract extension right now. I'm already locked in for the 5th-year option, and I think my numbers are going to be even better. And so there's a lot that rides on Greg Rousseau, but I'm pretty optimistic. We know he's going to be awesome against the run. We know he's going to be a good pass rusher. Can he be a great pass rusher? Can he turn more of his pressures into sacks? Can he finish more? Can he take over in big moments? That's what I'm looking for out of Greg Rousseau. Again, only 24 years old. And he's got 3 seasons under his belt. Excited to see what he looks like this coming year. I'm also very excited for the improved defensive tackle depth. I was asked a couple weeks ago, I think it was for Herd Mentality, where I thought the Bills improved the most during the offseason, and I think it's backup defensive tackle. Of course, you love Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, but we have been dealing with this pair of Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips for a long time, and those guys are not very good. I label both of them replacement-level depth players. And I think that they've elevated that with the signings of Austin Johnson and Deshawn Williams, who I think are both quality depth players. I don't think either one you want as a preferred starter, but those guys are good depth players. They've been good depth players. Austin Johnson, an A-gap defender, firm against the run, heavy hands, stout anchor, can play in the A-gap, can play out to the 5 a little bit if you want to do some odd front stuff. He's good. So was Deshawn Williams. Really enjoyed studying his tape with the Carolina Panthers. And now he gets to play in a penetration-style defense where I think he can be even better. So I think the swapping out of Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips for Austin Johnson and Deshawn Williams, not only did you get cheaper, but you got better, in my opinion. And I think that's going to be a big deal. And that doesn't even mention third-round pick Dewayne Carter as part of this mix. I'll talk about him in just a minute, but there's another body there that gets you excited. But I think what's undeniable about Johnson and Williams is that they're both good run defenders, and that matters a ton. If you look at this Bills schedule, this run defense is going to be tested. And the Bills' run defense, metrically, in terms of yards per carry last year, was kind of poor. And you got some big matchups. Arizona's a very good rushing offense. You got Miami twice. They're amazing at running the ball. Baltimore. You got Seattle, Indianapolis, the Niners, the Rams, the Lions. You got some good rushing offenses on this schedule. We know the Patriots are going to want to run the football. Some good teams here. And so I think not only do you, or at least I like the swap of players, but the emphasis on how important it's going to be this season is big in my mind. I'm intrigued about these 2 draft picks. The Bills had 10 draft picks. They used 2 of them on defensive linemen, 1 a defensive tackle, 1 an edge rusher. Third-round pick, Dewayne Carter out of Duke as the defensive tackle. Had a good career at Duke. 3-year team captain, 39-game starter. Collected 25 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 7 forced fumbles, 11 pass breakups. But his production dipped in 2023, and I think that's because they underwent a scheme change at Duke, and he winds up playing 20% of his snaps playing off the edge, which is just not a good spot for him to play. He's a B-gap defender. 6'2", 302 pounds, 33-inch arms, 10.25-inch hands, RAS score of a 7.67. Like I mentioned, a 3-time team captain, size, athleticism. It comes from a family of football players. Was the ACC Jack Tatum Award winner that goes to the top student athlete, so a high-character guy. Plays with a hot motor, quick, explosive, penetration-style player, very good pass rushing ability. I think his run defense is going to need some work, but I just went through all these players the Bills added in terms of depth, and that's what they can do. Now you bring in Dewayne Carter as a sub-rusher, and you can get some contributions there, and you get younger, right? That's the other side of this equation. You love Ed Oliver at 26 years old, but Williams, Johnson, and Jones are all north of 30. So now it's nice to have a cost control player that's on a rookie deal to give yourself another young building block for your defensive tackle group. And then the Bills drafted an edge rusher, Javon Solomon, 5th round out of Troy. And he's interesting as well. Wrestler, right? So can't overlook that he was a high school wrestler. Sean McDermott loves that. Maybe Javon Solomon and Gable Steveson can get some wrestling matches going on. But had an unbelievable career at Troy. 53 games, 25 starts, 49.5 tackles for loss, 32.5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles. Had 16 sacks this past season that led the country. To go with 18 tackles for loss, had 11 sacks in 2021. This guy can get to the quarterback. Now he's got an interesting body type, 6'1", 246, 33 and 7/8-inch arms. So maybe not the tallest, maybe not the most mass, but he's got good length, 10 3/4 on the hand length for the hand size. RAS score of a 7.29. And like I mentioned, 32.5 career sacks. You watch him play, good first step, flexible, long, has a lot of different pass rush moves, good hand power, and he's a finisher. Now, he's not going to come in and help you against the run, but I think as a designated pass rusher, he can help this football team. And so I think between those 2 new additions that you made through the draft, you got some young guys with some pass rush ability. So hopefully these guys can carve their roles, right? Like earn a role and help get after the quarterback, because the Bills can use that in a big way. Now, I'm really interested in a lot of dynamics with this group in general. And so on the other side of it, I want to talk about this defensive end depth. I want to talk about Von Miller, and I want to talk about showing up in the playoffs. So we'll get into all of that, and be sure to stick with me. When it comes to sorting out this defensive end depth, we're now getting into my biggest questions. I want to lead with defensive ends and who's going to make the team. I think you got 4 guys that are going to make it: Greg Rousseau, AJ Epenesa, Von Miller, Dawuane Smoot. Dawuane Smoot, the way that contract is structured, the guaranteed money, the void years, it all says he's making the team. And I like Dawuane Smoot. I think he can be a better version of what the Bills got from their 4th defensive end in Shaq Lawson. But then I think you have one more spot available for a 5th defensive end, and only one of Javon Solomon, Kingsley Jonathan, who made the team last year, and Casey Toohill, a veteran that the Bills signed from Washington. There's one spot for those guys. So barring injury, you've got some fun competitions there. I think it should be Javon Solomon as a cost control rookie that has the highest upside of any of the players I just mentioned. So we'll see how that plays itself out, but I'm really hopeful that it's Javon Solomon. All right, let's get into some Von Miller conversation. I know that herd mentality of Monday this week, I talked a lot about Von Miller in the opening segment. So I don't want to reheat all that stuff. You can go back and listen if you missed it. But I do want to call to your attention some quotes from Von Miller this past week from a Sports Illustrated interview. And he was asked about his goals personally and for the team in 2024. This is what he said, quote, "My biggest individual goal is just getting back to playing my style of football. It's crazy how you get injured and you come back and you really shouldn't have even been playing, and people judge you by a product on the field. I could have easily sat out all of last season, but I couldn't do my teammates like that. I felt like being later in my career, I didn't want to sacrifice any of my years, but at the same time, I shouldn't have been out there. I feel like people are judging me on that, so it's making me a little bit angry, to be honest. It's making me tap into a Von that I haven't been in a while. I just want to get back to playing my style of football, getting back to talking expletive, making sacks, dancing, and making plays for my teammates. That's been my whole mindset this offseason." He said twice that he shouldn't have been out there, and I agree. I mean, how many times did you hear me say during the season, like, he's not helping this team, he's a liability, like, he's not ready? And that would have been a tough pill to swallow because, I mean, at the same time, Von Miller, well, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He was saying week one. And now he's like, nah, I shouldn't have played. Like, dude, what is it, man? I want to forget about all this crap. I want him to just go out there and be something close to what you expect him to be. I like that he's motivated. I like that he's found a version of himself that he hasn't seen in a while. But I don't know. I feel like Von Miller in some ways feels like a politician to me, listening to him throughout the last, I guess now we're over 2 years of Von Miller being part of the Bills. It's like just optimism and promises. And it's like, well, that was all cool when you were really good for the 11 games prior to the injury, but it's been kind of tough to listen to. This guy right here, I mean, I think the Bills lack a difference maker, like an absolute monster dude with their pass rush. They don't have a Myles Garrett. They don't have a Nick Bosa. They don't have a TJ Watt. They don't have a Micah Parsons. They don't have a Chris Jones. They don't have an Aaron Donald. They don't have those guys. They have lots of good players, but not that dude. Von Miller's supposed to be that dude, right? And for 11 games, he absolutely was. But the problem is, like, he gets injured, and that's unfortunate. I totally get that. Like, it's very unfortunate. But it doesn't change that this is the money that you have earmarked and allocated for the dude, right? Like, the guy, the finisher, the guy that shows up and seals games for you, the guy that it's late in the game, They need to score, and this guy's going to dictate protection schemes for the Bills defense, and it's not only is he going to be a problem, but it's going to make other people a problem. That's what he's supposed to be. It's a missing piece of this team, which is disappointing because you feel like you've identified it, you've acquired it, but he's not that for you. For 11 games, he was. And he's 35, like he's 35. Yeah, he's further removed from the ACL tear, but he's 35. I don't know how to set expectations for Von Miller this year, but if he can be really good, that would be monumental for this defense. And the last but most important thing that I do want to mention here is this defensive line has got to show up in a bigger way in the most critical moments. To me, you want to talk about why the Bills have lost in the playoffs each of the last 4 years. I guess it's technically the last 5, right? Go back to the Texans game. But I'm talking the 3 to Kansas City, the 1 to Cincinnati. The reason I think the Bills lost those games is because the defensive line has not made enough of an impact. They have not made as much of an impact. Like Josh Allen, it's funny because like he wears this and people say, you can't win the big games of the playoffs. Like, what are you talking about? Josh Allen's awesome in the playoffs. His defense doesn't show up for him. And I think that starts with the defensive line. Now, there's been injuries, right? There's injuries in the back 7. Like, I totally get all of that. But to me, the defensive line is where things start with the defense, and they got to be better. Patrick Mahomes against the Bills in the playoffs, 3-0, 75% completion percentage, 306 passing yards per game, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in 3 games, passer rating of 126.6. He's a great player, and he's great in the postseason, but he's the most extreme, great version of himself against the Bills in the playoffs. He stinks against the Bills in the regular season. 1-3, 277 passing yards per game, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, passer rating of 85.1. Super mid. Then he becomes Super Mahomes against the Bills in the playoffs. Why? Because it's easy for him, because the defensive line doesn't make any impact. 0 interceptions, 0 turnover-worthy plays in 3 playoff wins against the Bills. He's been sacked a total of 3 times in those 3 games. He's been sacked 35 times in his other 15 playoff games. So it's not like he doesn't get sacked in the playoffs. The Bills just don't get to him. Joe Burrow in the 1 playoff game did not have a turnover-worthy play, was 23 of 36, 242 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interception, was sacked 1 time. The Bills against Mahomes and Burrow in 4 games in the playoffs sacked those guys a total of 4 times and have 0 turnover-worthy plays. The defensive line has been crap in those moments. And you want to figure out like how the Bills are going to do it and get over the hump and beat one of those teams in the playoffs, their defensive line's got to show up and make an impact. So we can enjoy all these cool regular season metrics about pressure and sack rate. Where y'all at in playoffs? Where are y'all at when it matters the most? That's going to be critical. So hopefully this conversation painted the right picture for you regarding the dynamics surrounding the Bills defensive line entering 2024. This is what's heavily on my mind. Heavily. I think this is critical. I hope you enjoyed as we get ready for this 2024 season that will be here very, very quickly. Just a couple more weeks. The Bills will be at training camp. I'm going to be there for a week. It's going to be awesome. So as always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.